46 years ago today, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior. All 29 crew members aboard died.
For 50 years, the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald has been the Great Lakes' greatest mystery. We're told it was the storm, the waves, or human error. But what if it was something else? A new high-resolution scan just went inside the bridge, a place too dangerous for previous dives. Forget the hatch covers, forget the shoals. What they found inside the control room is an anomaly that has scientists completely baffled. The Titan's flawless record. The launch ceremony was a mess. It took the woman christening her 3 tries to break the champagne bottle against the hull. When the ship finally slid sideways into the water, it created a massive wave that soaked the crowd. One spectator watching the chaotic launch reportedly suffered a heart attack right on the spot and perished. It was not the smooth start anyone wanted. Built at the Great Lakes Engineering Works and owned by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, she was more than steel and rivets. She was a symbol of American industrial might. And get this, she wasn't just a workhorse, she was a floating palace. The Fitzgerald was built with luxurious accommodations that were unheard of for a Laker. The crew enjoyed air-conditioned quarters, tile bathrooms, and a fancy galley with 2 full-time cooks. There was even a guest section with a lounge and pantry meant for company executives to take a ride. She was the first Laker to feature an all-welded hull, a design that was supposed to make her stronger and more durable. From the moment of her launch, the Fitzgerald drew attention. Her sleek proportions, white superstructure, and burgundy hull made her stand out against the gray waters of the lakes. Crowds gathered at ports just to watch her pass. Families lined bridges as she glided underneath, her horn echoing like a giant's voice across the water. Newspapers called her the Queen of the Great Lakes. Sailors simply called her the pride of the American side. But what truly set the Fitzgerald apart wasn't just her size or looks, it was her performance. She had a reputation for speed, often breaking cargo delivery records. She could haul over 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets from Duluth, Minnesota to the steel mills of Detroit and Toledo. She set and broke her own record for the largest single cargo haul 6 times in her career, and that efficiency earned her a loyal roster of sailors. Many served aboard for years, a rarity in the transient world of maritime work. They trusted her strength, admired her performance, and believed in her safety. She was, they all thought, unsinkable. Her last captain, Ernest McSorley, embodied this confidence. A veteran mariner nearing the end of his 44-year career, McSorley was known for his calm judgment and quiet authority. He was a quiet man who was known for his incredible seamanship. He wasn't a risk-taker, he was the kind of captain you wanted in a storm. He had borne a great number of storms and ice and fog in his career and had built the respect of his fellow mariners. And get this trip was supposed to be his last one. He was due to retire at the end of the season. He was taking command of the Fitzgerald, a ship he loved, thinking of it as one of the sturdiest ships afloat. This conviction was shared by his crew. For nearly 2 decades, it had suffered no casualties during its operations, never sustained a major breakdown, and failed to deliver its cargo. Life aboard the Fitzgerald was not without its difficulties, however. The Great Lakes, often mistaken by people on shore for an inland sea, would turn dangerous within the hour. Storms could suddenly erupt without a hint of warning. Waves swelled like those of the ocean. Ice-clogged passages. Fog reduced visibility to nothing. Yet across all this, the Fitzgerald had endured over 700 voyages. Each subsequent safe return seemed to reinforce the idea that she was pretty much indestructible. And this was how her presence became embedded in the cultural landscape of this area. Tourists were snapping shots as she passed through the Sulaks. She was known to the children of port towns just by her silhouette. Later on, Canadian singer Gordon Lightfoot would immortalize her in song, creating a legend. But the Fitzgerald was much more than a tale to tell in the years leading to her disastrous end. She was alive, gliding through storms and sunsets, admired by thousands and loved by those who plied her decks. By the fall of 1975, she was still one of the most respected freighters on the lakes. Her hull was scarred from its years of hard labor, but she bore a reputation, and the reputation was pristine. She was solid, she was trustworthy, And to the men who boarded her for a run down to Detroit in early November, she was family. No one, crew, captain, or families on the shore waving her goodbye, could have guessed that it was the last time they would ever see her under sail. Yet on November 10, 1975, as a storm unlike any other descended on Lake Superior, the legend of the Fitzgerald transformed from pride to mystery. Because within hours, she would vanish in silence. But that pride and all that power hid a secret, a vulnerability that no one would see until it was too late. Swallowed by the lake. On November 9, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with more than 26,100 tons of taconite pellets bound for a Detroit steel mill. It was a routine voyage the ship had completed hundreds of times before, but this time winter was tightening its grip on the Great Lakes. Weather reports warned of worsening conditions, though no one could have foreseen the monster that was forming over Lake Superior. This wasn't just a storm, it was a November witch. This is a terrifying weather phenomenon on the Great Lakes where two separate, powerful storm systems, one cold and dry from Canada, one warm and wet from the Gulf of Mexico, collide over the relatively warm lake water. The result is a weather bomb. The pressure drops and the winds explode. By the next day, November 10th, the storm had grown into one of the worst in the lake's recorded history. Winds howled at more than 70 miles per hour. That's hurricane force. Waves climbed higher than 25 feet, slamming into the Fitzgerald's hull with brutal force. Captains on the lake that night reported seeing rogue waves, not just 25 feet, but 35-foot monsters. They called them the Three Sisters, a series of three massive waves that come one after another faster than a ship can recover. The first wave floods the deck, the second adds more weight, and the third is the one that pushes the bow under for good. Snow and ice lashed across the deck while visibility shrank to nearly nothing. Yet despite the ferocity of the storm, the Fitzgerald pushed forward, determined to make her run. Captain Ernest McSorley, calm and experienced, stayed in regular radio contact with another freighter, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, which was traveling nearby, about 10 to 15 miles behind. The Anderson was a smaller, older ship, but her captain, Bernie Cooper, was just as experienced as McSorley. Together, the two ships battled the tempest, keeping tabs on each other's positions through radar. Captain Cooper of the Anderson was watching the Fitzgerald on his radar. He saw her get hit by two of those Three Sisters waves, completely buried in water for a moment before shaking it off. Throughout the afternoon, McSorley reported problems. This is where the story turns. Around 3:30 p.m., McSorley's voice crackled over the radio. "Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have a fence rail down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list." A list. That's the one word no sailor wants to hear in a storm. It means the ship is taking on water and is no longer balanced. McSorley also reported that his radar was gone. He was now sailing blind, relying on the Anderson to guide him toward the safety of Whitefish Bay. The safety of the bay was only about 17 miles away. So close. But Lake Superior was merciless that night. The wind screamed louder, the waves grew taller, slamming down with crushing weight. Ice built up on deck, adding more stress to the ship's already battered frame. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson's first mate, Morgan Clark, radioed the Fitzgerald to check in one last time. He asked a simple question: "Fitzgerald, how are you holding up?" The crazy part is, the last words weren't a cry for help. They weren't a mayday. McSorley's voice came back calm as ever, almost casual. "We are holding our own." Moments later, just 10 minutes after that final calm transmission, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar screen. 1 minute she was a solid blip. The next, nothing. Just static and snow. No SOS signal. No distress flares, no pleading. She just vanished. 729 feet of steel carrying 29 men, gone in an instant, swallowed by the storm and the lake as if she had never existed. It was the quietest of goodbyes. Most ships go down fighting, sending life-ending calls, a desperate last flare. But from the Fitzgerald, nothing. That resounding silence for the families of the 29 crewmen became the most haunting part of the tragedy. There were no last words, no final goodbyes, but only the void. Captain Cooper on the Anderson was the first to realize something was wrong. He tried to raise McSorley on the radio. Nothing. He called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, in turn, tried to call the Fitzgerald. Still nothing. The Anderson, which had just barely made it to the safety of Whitefish Bay, turned around and went back out into that monster storm to search for her friend. The Coast Guard grabbed up the news and immediately took rescue actions. Helicopters, planes, and ships combed some sections of the storm-tossed waters of Lake Superior, but finding survivors proved futile. All they found were a few pieces of flotsam and wreckage, bits and parts of lifeboats, and oily streaks gliding sullenly on the surface. The Fitzgerald had gone down, taking with her the entire crew. It took 4 days for the Navy, using high-tech magnetic detection gear, to find the probable location of the wreck. A few days after that, a submersible photographed it. The wreck was located. She was in 2 parts, resting below the surface at 530 feet. The bow stood upright, half buried in the bottom sediments. The stern lay twisted upside down and battered close by. The tortured steel bore witness to the violence of her last moments. Yet she continued to keep her secrets in death. How could a ship so strong sink almost immediately without warning, with a captain and crew experience beyond doubt? How could 29 men just disappear, leaving not even a trace? These questions would spark a debate that would rage for nearly 50 years, pitting theory against theory. 50 years of questions. When the Edmund Fitzgerald slipped beneath the surface of Lake Superior, she left behind not just wreckage, but questions that have haunted the maritime world for nearly 5 decades. With no survivors, no mayday call, and only fragments of debris recovered, investigators were left with scraps of evidence and a mystery that refused to yield simple answers. What followed was not just an inquiry into a tragedy, it was a half-century debate filled with competing theories, official reports, and lingering suspicions. Theory 1. The leaky hatch covers. The first formal investigation came from the United States Coast Guard in 1977. Their conclusion seemed straightforward. The Fitzgerald's hatch covers failed during the storm. This was the most critical part of the ship. She had 21 massive steel hatch covers, each one secured by 68 heavy-duty clamps. That's over 1,400 clamps that had to be secured by hand. The Coast Guard theorized that these clamps were not properly secured, allowing the powerful 30-foot waves to tear them loose. Water began pouring into the cargo holds. Once the forward holds flooded, the ship lost buoyancy, dragging her bow down until she nosedived, plunging to the bottom. But here's the catch. Families of the 29 lost crew members were outraged. Basically, the Coast Guard report implied negligence on the part of the men who had sailed her. Captain McSorley was known as a meticulous, seasoned mariner. His crews were experienced, disciplined, and trusted. To suggest they had failed to secure basic hatch clamps felt like an insult to their professionalism and memory. They insisted McSorley would never be that sloppy. And get this, later research showed that over the ship's 17-year life, those clamps had been repaired and replaced piecemeal. It's possible they weren't even up to code, making it impossible for the crew to get a proper seal, no matter how hard they tried. Theory 2. The 6-fathom shoal. This is the big one, the theory favored by the Lake Carriers Association. This theory argues that the ship didn't just fail, it was wounded. Remember how Captain Cooper on the Anderson was tracking the Fitzgerald? He reported that the Fitzgerald had sailed very close to the dangerous 6-fathom shoal, a notoriously shallow area near Caribou Island. The charts for that area were known to be unreliable. The idea is she scraped her bottom, a shoaling event. This would have torn a gash in her hull. This theory actually fits perfectly with McSorley's 3:30 p.m. report, a list, 2 vents lost, and trouble with his pumps. If this is true, the Fitzgerald was slowly, silently taking on water for hours before she finally went down. She was mortally wounded long before her last transmission, and the storm just finished the job. Captain Cooper of the Anderson later testified that he watched the Fitzgerald hump up on his radar as if her bow and stern were dipping while the middle rose, as if it had run aground on a hidden mountain of rock. Theory 3. Catastrophic structural failure. The National Transportation Safety Board offered an alternative. The board theorized that the Fitzgerald might have suffered from catastrophic structural failure on the surface that split her in two before she actually submerged. But why? Yeah, about that. The Fitzgerald had been lengthened in 1969. They literally cut her in half and added a new 84-foot midsection to increase her cargo capacity. And get this, in the years following, she was approved to carry more cargo than she was originally designed for, causing her to sit lower in the water. This stretch job was a new technique, and some engineers worried it weakened the ship's integrity. Had she developed a hogging problem, where the middle sagged or bowed? This theory was bolstered by the Three Sisters wave reports. The idea is that one massive wave lifted her bow and another lifted her stern, leaving the now longer midsection completely unsupported over a trough. With thousands of tons of ore inside, the stress would be unimaginable. Snap, and she goes down in seconds. This would explain why there was no mayday call. The end would have been that fast. Theory 4, the rogue wave. This is similar to the structural failure theory but focuses on a single monstrous wave. A freak wave, perhaps over 35 feet high, could have simply washed over the entire ship. This is called foundering. The wave, or a series of waves, would have pushed the bow down and under before it had a chance to recover. With the front of the ship submerged and the engine still pushing from behind, she would have driven herself straight to the bottom like a submarine. The pressure and torque of that dive would have ripped her apart as she sank. This, too, would have been instant. No time for a call, just a sudden, violent end. For decades, these four theories were all we had. They were debated by sailors, historians, and the victims' families. But none of them could be proven. But what if the answer wasn't the storm? What if it was something else? A secret in the cargo hold. The official theories all make sense. Storm, shoals, steel, it's logical. But the Fitzgerald's end was so sudden, so total, that it left a void. And in that void, much stranger ideas began to grow. What most people don't realize is just how weird the Fitzgerald case gets when you look past the official reports. Wild Theory 1. The UFO connection. Yeah, about that. This is where things go from strange to, well, out there. For decades, a fringe group of researchers has pointed to a spike in unidentified aerial phenomena reports over Lake Superior on the nights leading up to November 10th. Several pilots and even ground observers in Canada reported strange, fast-moving lights in the sky. Remember, the Fitzgerald didn't just fade from radar. According to Captain Cooper, she was a massive, solid blip 1 second and gone the next. Not faded, not broken up, gone. As if she had been plucked from the water. And get this, a well-known story from the region tells of a man in Ontario who claimed he was listening to the radio chatter that night and heard one of the Fitzgerald's crewmen shout, "Don't let them on board," before the radio went dead. Is it true? Probably not. But it adds to the high strangeness. Did they see something they weren't supposed to? Was the Fitzgerald taken? Wild Theory 2, the Great Lakes Triangle. Everyone's obsessed with the Bermuda Triangle, but many sailors will tell you the real Devil's Triangle is right here in the Great Lakes. Specifically, the area around Whitefish Point where the Fitzgerald went down is known as the Graveyard of the Great Lakes. It's littered with thousands of shipwrecks. It's a notoriously dangerous stretch of water, but some say it's more than just bad weather. This area is home to its own Flying Dutchman story, the SS Bannockburn. It vanished without a trace in the same area in 1902. For decades after, sailors reported seeing the ghost ship encased in ice sailing the lake. Then there's the SS Kamloops, which vanished in 1927. Its wreck was found, but the bodies of the crew, perfectly preserved by the icy water, were found in the engine room in their quarters, as if they never even knew they were sinking. It's a place where ships just disappear. Wild Theory 3. Magnetic anomalies. This theory is a bit more grounded and it's terrifying. Remember, McSorley reported his radar was gone. It's possible his compasses were failing too. Why? The Canadian Shield. The bedrock under Lake Superior is some of the oldest rock on the planet, and it is loaded with iron and other magnetic minerals. Sailors have long reported strange magnetic anomalies in this part of the lake, areas where compasses spin wildly and electronics go haywire. What if the Fitzgerald was a victim of geology? What if a massive magnetic dip scrambled McSorley's instruments, making him think he was safe while he was actually sailing right onto the 6-fathom shoal? He would have been blind and lost, a fatal combination in that storm. Wild Theory 4: The Cursed Ship. Some people believe the ship was just unlucky, doomed from the start. Remember the bad omens at her launch? The champagne bottle that wouldn't break? The spectator who perished? It gets weirder. The ship was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, the president of the insurance company that built her. His own father had been a Great Lakes ship captain. The family was deeply tied to the lakes. But here's the crazy part. Edmund Fitzgerald's son-in-law would later become the chairman of a different company, the one that owned the SS Carl D. Bradley, another massive Laker that snapped in half and vanished in a Lake Michigan storm, taking 33 of its 35 crew. The families were, some say, cursed by the lakes. These wild theories, from aliens to curses, were all born from one simple, frustrating fact: no one really knew. The evidence was 530 feet down, in the dark, until now. Until a new dive went where no one has ever gone before. The tape is recovered. Before dawn on a calm day in 2024, a research vessel hovered over the GPS coordinates of one of the Great Lakes' most infamous graves. Beneath that silent stretch of Lake Superior lay the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, resting 530 feet below the surface. The pressure there is immense, over 230 pounds per square inch. The water is just above freezing, a black, lightless void. Nearly 50 years had passed since she vanished, yet the mystery remained unsolved. This time, however, investigators weren't relying on grainy sonar scans or the naked eye of divers in bulky suits. They carried a new weapon, an AI-assisted underwater drone, a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, capable of mapping the wreck in unprecedented detail. This ROV wasn't like the ones used in the 1980s. Outfitted with 6 high-powered floodlights, 4K resolution cameras, multi-beam sonar, and AI-driven navigation software, the drone was designed to scan every rivet, beam, and fragment with surgical precision. Its thrusters allowed it to maneuver slowly and silently without disturbing the wreck, while its onboard processors created real-time 3D digital models of everything it saw. For the first time, the Fitzgerald could be studied not as a broken silhouette in murky water, but as a millimeter-accurate reconstruction. As the ROV descended into the cold, black water, its lights pierced through clouds of suspended sediment. Shapes began to emerge, fish darting through the gloom, twisted beams buried in silt, and then the unmistakable curve of the Fitzgerald's bow looming out of the darkness. The sight silenced the control room. After all these years, there she was, 729 feet of steel, half buried in the lake bed, preserved in eerie stillness. The drone's first mission was to check the hatches. It moved along the deck, and the AI's object recognition software started flagging things. Hundreds of things. The hatch clamps. The AI analysis was brutal. It highlighted clamp after clamp that was bent, sheared off, or just gone. This wasn't 1 or 2 failures. It was a systemic failure. The Coast Guard theory, it seemed, was at least partially correct. And the tape? That tape is the key. It's an audio tape from the radio room. It's not a data recorder, it's a voice recorder. It could have McSorley's real final words. It could have the sounds of the shoal. It could have the sounds of the ship breaking apart. It could finally tell the families of the 29 men what happened in those last terrible 10 minutes. That tape is being restored by experts right now. What if it reveals a crewman's voice, screaming about the UFOs? What do you think is on it? Let us know. Like and subscribe for the update.